basis of the legend of lycanthropy itself is the beast within all of us. That's actually a line from the 1941 version of the Wolfman. It's the beast inside us. And you have to wonder, does the bite of the werewolf put the beast into you, or does it just let it out?
It's a question like, who are we and how do we describe ourselves? And do we describe ourselves as animals or not? And where do we draw that line?
To me, it's all very Freudian. We all possess the monster and the beast in us. It's there, and we either choose to confront it, or we choose to hide it, and we suffer the consequences if we hide it.
We desire that loss of control and the ability to change, and we can't let go of it, and it's that kind of desire to understand the dark side in us.
I think that the idea that a man goes back to the most primal, animalistic place, those things are like, they're classic.
The classic universal monsters we'll always think of as sort of Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman. It's been a major part of their legacy for 70 years.
My earliest recollection of acting was watching Boris Karloff playing Frankenstein. And I remember playing Frankenstein in school. I would walk into a store and there'll be a postcard with the Bride of Frankenstein, and it makes me feel at home. I don't know why. Probably because when I was a kid, I watched these movies. All those guys, Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, Glenn Strange. I really know all these Universal pictures. Everybody was pretty much thinking of wanting to do a movie that was like old school. And, you know, doing that honor to the classic Lon Chaney Jr. movie, that was exciting for me.
One of the challenges in making a picture like this is to transcend the audience's perception of what the genre is. David Self wrote a very intense and very intelligent screenplay. And like all screenplays, it really lends itself to interpretation.
Do you want to have enough connections with the original that the people who know the original feel how you've taken the inspiration from the original and breathed another iteration of life into it? It's definitely daunting. You want to live up to their expectations, for sure. Joe really worked hard at developing this film, and I think his sort of understanding of the history of the character and the nature of the monster he was shooting was important.
And what Joe did really well was understand how to balance both sides of the story. You know, to balance what is essentially a father-son kind of Shakespearean drama, and then also the monster movie aspect.
I think he allowed the actors to explore their characters in a way that I don't think any actor could complain. He allowed me to try different things in a way that, you know, it encourages for creativity.
Benicio, he's really playing two characters, Lawrence Talbot and the Beast. And the Beast is his own enemy in a way. As Lawrence Talbot, he's the victim of his alter ego. After he's been the Wolfman, he doesn't remember what he's done. He knows that he's done some horrible things. What's more terrifying is he knows it's going to happen again in 30 days. So there's that sort of ticking clock that in many ways holds elements of the story together.
Lon Chaney Jr. played Lawrence Talbot in the original. He was the first. He was the best.
What is this story about a man turning into a wolf?
You know, I was influenced a lot by what he did. If anything, I think my Lawrence Talbot got more psychological problems, you may say, you know, than the original.
Earlier incarnations of the script, Lawrence is sort of this rakish figure, very appealing, very attractive, but who would sort of try to submerge his past into the oblivion of being an actor and being sort of a worldly figure, trying to escape the terrible things that were done to him when he was younger. He makes a great tragic figure.
Benicio plays these stages in his character's arc with a lot of subtlety.
The thing about Benicio is he brings such pathos to his characters. You know, he's a great non-verbal actor. He can say a lot with his eyes. He can say a lot with his mannerisms. His look can really tell you a lot of emotional depth.
As each transformation comes and goes, his character descends into this darker place. The distinctions are very, very subtle, and we didn't even realize fully what he was doing until we started putting the film together. It was not obvious on the set at all. It's only obvious in his close-ups that Lawrence Talbot, he's sort of devolving, and he's sinking lower and lower into this horrible situation he's in.
It's been exciting working with him because there's a rawness to him that's unrivaled by most other actors out there. And I think that's been really important for this film because with a certain genre you can veer into cliche and he'll reject that every time. So there's a purity to him playing this part and a madness. I mean, he's completely mad, which I like to tell him.
Yeah. Okay. Freddie, I want to turn this thing into paper mache.
Like the prodigal son. He goes back to see his father. A lot of the old ghosts, you know, they come out. In the original, there's not that much of a conflict at all.
Hello, Father.
And in this one, the conflict is right there from the get-go.
I've often wondered what you look like.
You seem well.
He doesn't express any gentleness with tragedy or grief. And that's the way he deals with his son. He's an iceberg. He's utterly cold. But he's also manipulative, and he needles him by offhand remarks, but never overtly cruel, just something suggested. Life and death mean nothing to him.
Anthony gives us these little glimpses into the madness of Sir John. And as you're watching, you go, wow, what was that? What was he doing there? That was sort of strange. And then the window closes, and you wait for it to open again.
And these things come along to you once in a while when you're acting. You find something that wells up from the unconscious mind, I suppose, and you use it. You follow your intuition. For example, there's a scene where I visit my son in the asylum. And I'm very cruel to him, but in a very nice way. Coming down the corridor where there are all these people, you know, crazy people in this bedroom, I had an idea to play the harmonica. For me, it's a dark psychological depth. He plays the harmonica almost as a guard, and it's a talisman of sound that wards off evil. I think we possess so much in our subconscious mind that we can use it all, and I'll use anything I can to be outrageous, to be daring.
Underneath the action and the blood and the terror is a very tragic love story.
Ben said that you played her as children.
Lawrence and Gwen are truly falling in love, and we don't really understand that there's this triangle to the relationship until much later. And it's sort of sick and twisted that Sir John has killed his other son, Ben, and is now after his dead son's fiancée.
We desire what we shouldn't. I think that's human nature, but they're both suffering. They're kind of the only ones who extend their hands to each other, offering some kind of solace or some kind of help. There's a darkness there and a wildness to him that she's never touched on with her relationships with anyone else in her life, and there's a danger to him that she recognizes in herself.
I really wanted that relationship to be the element that held the story together and that invested the audience in what this guy Lawrence was going through. He's cursed with this terrible affliction. At the same time, he's falling in love with his brother's fiancée, and he's powerless to control that as well. So it's almost like a double curse.
The Victorian era was just right for what's going on underneath the surface in Wolfman. I mean, it's all to do with the Victorian repression sort of holding certain things down and elements within human nature coming out and letting out the beast within. There's something in this idea of the battle between human nature and what we try and wrap around human nature and what we're trying to sort of make ourselves into being. I think the whole idea of the Wolfman is saying, well, yes, we are animals. We are animals. We have animal natures, we have animal instincts, we have bestial desires. So if you cloak that in the Victorian world, the counterpoint between those two, between the Victorian world and the instinctive, animalistic world, are really quite acute.
Run free. Kill or be killed.
When he transforms, he experiences this unspeakable freedom. And he tries to get his son to experience the same. Beast is just the beast. That's all. It's the bogeyman, the jack-in-the-box. And when we hide it and are afraid of it, that's when it becomes dangerous. Very dangerous.
Yes, it's a horror movie, yes, it's an entertainment, but actually if you tap into the darker aspects of a film like this, you can really start to unearth something that should be deeply discomforting.
We set out to try to do a movie in the vein of those classic Universal horror movies. But if we do other things and we explore other things about the original, then I think we've done our job.
I think Claude Rains said it best. It's a dual personality inside all of us. There's a beast inside each and every one of us. And Lawrence Talbot, unfortunately, had his let out.
It is glorious, isn't it?
I remember us actually sitting in Rick's garden, and I said to Rick, I just read somewhere that they're going to remake The Wolfman. And Rick went, what do you know about that? And I thought, wow, he's really interested.
When I heard they were going to do a remake of The Wolfman, I just said to myself, I have to do this. It was always one of my favorite films. The Universal classic horror films are what made me want to do what I do for a living. So I pursued it. I never really do that. But I was actually on the Universal lot doing another film and went and talked to a producer that I knew there. And I said, are they really going to do this Wolfman movie? Because if they do, I really have to do this. Once I heard it was going to be a guy in a makeup, it was kind of scary. Jack Pierce was my first idol. That makeup I thought was so great. I still wanted to be true to what Jack did. I thought, well, how am I gonna do this? How am I gonna make this work?
You're making movies and you're like, God, if we could get X actor to play this part, it'd be tremendous. And that's Rick Baker.
The fact that he loved it as much as we did was a great incoming call, and we kind of hung up and danced the jig after that phone call, so it was great.
Having him being part of the Wolfman, you know, was really one of the caveats from day one. He's this icon who's brought to life so many great characters and so many different things, and makes you believe all along that the things that he creates are actually three-dimensionalized characters or people, and his work is just extraordinary.
Benicio is a big fan of the Wolfman. He said he grew up with a great big poster of the Wolfman's face. In his mind, that's what the Wolfman should have been. I said, I kind of agree. You know, I mean, I think it should be very much that. I still wanted to honor what Jack did, but, you know, I said, I think it needs to be updated a little bit. At that time, too, they were thinking of it being kind of an R-rated movie as far as the violence and stuff. The Cheney Wolfman, as much as I love it, kind of grabs people. He's got that kind of undershot jaw, but they almost look like human teeth, you know, and I just really thought he should have bigger claws and bigger teeth so he could do more damage. It was a kind of a daunting task to try to, like, redefine what the Wolfman was and still respect Jack Pierce's work.
Rick Baker, he's more than a fan. He knows all those movies. He knows all the actors in it. He knows all the makeup artists. I think we both have this, like, respect for these monsters, you know.
And when you have an actor like Benicio, it would be a real shame to just make a digital wolf character.
I'm glad that Rick Baker and I saw eye to eye with the look of the monster. So we hit it off.
There's a picture that we did very early on of Benicio kind of leaning over Rick Baker, and you just went, okay, that guy's the Wolfman.
Everyone says Benicio del Toro as Wolfman. Oh, great, he doesn't need any makeup. But the character that Rick created on top of Benicio is just amazing.
The first thing that I designed was the face. I mean, I thought that was the most important thing to worry about. And the very first painting I did was more to show Benicio what he would look like as Lon Chaney Jr.'s Wolfman. I basically painted a Lon Chaney Jr. Wolfman over a photo of Benicio. And then I did what I thought Wolfman should be like, try to convince them that it should be amped up a little bit. I did hundreds of designs. And in the end, I went all the way back to virtually my first design. We were almost to the time we had to start filming. And I just said, okay, I have to make something, and you guys don't have a choice.
And then Rick did a makeup test that he did on himself, and as soon as that arrived, that was like, well, that's like almost 100% there.
I like doing that because I like to see what it's like on the other side.
It doesn't matter how long you're sitting on that chair. With Rick Baker, the magic is, you know, bit by bit. You know, you just close your eyes for 5 minutes, you open up again, and something is happening. You know, this side is full. You're starting to look really dangerous.
I was amazed the first time I saw him in the makeup. It was beyond anything I thought it was going to be. It's difficult for an actor to be, you know, in the chair that long, but it was almost like while the makeup was going on, he was slowly transforming into the Wolfman, because when he came out of the chair, he was a different guy completely.
Benito's in there for 4.5 hours. And when you see it from start to finish and the work that Rick and his team do and the precision and the care, it's why he's who he is and it's why he's as great as he is.
One example of his craftsmanship and the genius that he brings to it, I think, is the way the face actually moves to the actor's expression. You don't feel that the actor's trapped in a mask. It's really their face that is operating it.
You have to do everything even bigger. When you open your eyes, you really have to open it, because everything is pushing you down, and every move has to be bigger and faster. You know, when we take off that stuff, I was covered in sweat, and it was a workout.
You've done terrible things.
I got a photo off the internet of Tony and painted my initial design, and he emailed me right away and said, you know, I am so excited about doing this movie now. He said, you know, I wasn't really sure, and when I saw your design, I just knew that I had to do this, and I just think it's incredible, and I so want to do this. And I just thought that was really cool, you know, and he said, anything I can do to help. And I kind of said, well, I need you for a cast, and I needed you for a cast a long time ago. He goes, okay, I'll be there tomorrow. Where do I go? And he says, you know, my agent says I can't do anything because we haven't signed a contract yet, but I don't care. I'm coming out. So he came out the next day, and we got a live cast and got started.
Rick Baker's quite a remarkable man, and he's a perfectionist. I don't know much about this business of creature effects and all that, but it's certainly interesting working with him. It's interesting going through it as well.
I like the idea of, you know, two werewolves and doing two different designs, especially when you have an actor like Anthony Hopkins or Benicio del Toro to make sure that you still kind of see them in the makeup. And that is kind of hard in something like the Wolfman, where most of their face is covered with hair and such. We all made the decision early on not to use contact lenses on the characters, because you lose a certain life. But like in the case of Anthony Hopkins, I mean, he has, you know, these very distinctive eyes. His eyes are just so piercing and blue and really stand out.
You put the teeth in the full furry makeup, and with the full makeup, my own eyes look good. So it retains the human element of John Talbot.
I always liked the way Lon Chaney Jr. walked in the balls of his feet, and it kind of gave it that dog leg. And on this film, I worked with Dave Elsey, English makeup artist, a friend of mine, and Dave was kind of pushing for leg extensions, and I don't know, it's kind of hard to put these guys in that.
This is all technology that was developed for people who've lost limbs and stuff. It's all carbon fiber, it's all very light. And when he puts his weight on them, they're balanced so that he can walk around on them and he can stand still on them, he's not going to fall off them. These ones here, he can just run, he can jump on them, he can actually do kickboxing on them as well. It's pretty amazing.
We knew that there would be some stunt people doing some stuff, so we explored both of those and used both those things, kind of like almost like the Lon Chaney feet amped up a little bit, and then amped up a lot for the leg extension type thing. In the initial makeup I did on myself, I had some claws on it, and Dave Elsey really wanted to put big claws on it. I was going, I don't know, I think those are a little bit beyond what I find believable. But it turned out everybody was liking the big claws, so we kind of went with those. The initial claws we made were hard acrylic, and they were dangerous. Benicio kind of goes for it. He's kind of this wild man when he's in the makeup. So we have these big claws that are really sharp and hard. he's going to hurt himself. So we ended up making a set of hands for our actors that were soft claws, and then we had, in the case of Benicio, we also had some shorter claws too, which he ended up preferring to use, because it is awkward when you got these huge things that extend your fingers so much.
There are so many different departments and different elements that make up the Wolfman. You know, I mean, you have a fabrication department who work on all of the body shapes, his chest and his arms, and that all has to be manufactured, sculpted, painted. And then on top of that, he then has a hair suit, which is all made out of yak hair, also dyed, and there's about 4 or 5 different colours all kind of mixed into it. All of the hairs are individually knotted, like you would a wig, onto the suit.
It's also what Jack Pierce used on the original one, was yak hair.
Yeah. It's actually a really good choice for Wolfman because it's almost like sort of human hair, but it's a bit edgier. The most important thing is to get every little element right and then bring it all together to create the character.
Lon Chaney, he couldn't really do what Benicio can do in this makeup because the materials that we're using are more actor-friendly, really, you know, and they're more flexible. Lon Chaney, he could really only ever have these lower teeth, and he could never really show his upper teeth because this upper lip was just a latex piece and wasn't that flexible.
What I really wanted to do is, these are like the 4 teeth, like the human teeth. I want to do 6 teeth. It's always tough when you put teeth in an actor, and these were big teeth. I think we had a half a dozen different sets of teeth we made, some with 4 teeth in between the canines, some with 6, and some that stuck out more.
I had to take off my teeth and give them to someone so I could talk, because it's really hard to talk to the director with these big teeth. They're going, rah, 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 rah.
Benny, fortunately, can open his mouth really, really wide. I angled the lower teeth at a certain angle so that it kind of accentuated the movement of the jaw. When the jaw opened up and with these teeth being angled out, he could seriously bite somebody and really take a chunk out. In fact, you have to be careful when you got those teeth. I think Benicio did bite Tony one time. What is hard is when you do a bloody scene and then he has to be clean to start with again. And Benicio, his attitude is more is more. If we were putting a little blood on his face, he goes, no, more. He goes, fill my mouth up with blood and I'm gonna spit blood out. And he would just like fill his mouth to the brim and then just like spit it out and shake his head, you know, so it just went flying everywhere and it'd go up in his eyes and everything else. And then it's like, oh man.
Cut! Okay, cut it! It was a good bite.
Now we gotta try to make it look clean for the next take.
He did some kind of interesting stuff in the makeup. He wasn't just playing it as purely an animal or anything. It was somewhere caught in between.
The first time I put it on, I was kind of frozen. I didn't know what to do. But then by the second time I put it on, I found out you can really do funky stuff.
Benicio wanted edible parts. We had a scene where he wanted a human arm that he wanted to be able to bite and actually eat a piece of the skin and to be able to chew on the bone. So we had one guy whose job it was to just make edible body parts. He was great, actually. He did some really great stuff. And it was quite tasty, actually. You know, he had this like weird honeycomb bone thing and some kind of weird jelly stuff inside it for the marrow and this kind of licorice type muscles. And Benny quite liked it.
I think it's one of the things that this movie has is it's got Anthony Hopkins in makeup. And it's got me in makeup, and we're going back to Halloween when we were 8, and it's fun. It's an actor's dream.
So much of my job is transforming someone into something else. That's kind of what I do. But I also think it's fun to actually see that transformation happen, you know. Action! I think when you're a kid and you see a film like The Wolfman or Frankenstein for the first time, it just kind of becomes part of your being. My hope with the remake of The Wolfman is that at least we'll kind of bring back some of that gothic horror and introduce it to a whole new generation.
In The Wolfman, our influences and the approach to the visual effects was very much in a slightly more sedate style, and I think you probably get in a lot of modern creature, horror, monster kind of movies. The visual effects had to be impressive, but not too over the top and showy. We tried to restrain a lot of that.
Take what? With computer animation where anything is possible, it's sometimes very tempting and it's very easy to stray and break this barrier of believability, or you break the laws of physics. And what we're trying to do with computer animation is to keep it as absolutely real as possible.
set to do a full rehearsal, guys, please.
The foreground, green, with the gypsy caravan.
Interesting thing about working with Joe, particularly for me, is I'm very, very aware of his background as a storyboard artist, concept designer, etc., on the Star Wars series, and a lot of the stuff he did with ILM and George Lucas. So I was looking forward to working with him on this project in a big way.
One thing I definitely wanted to do in making this film was show the audience something that they hadn't seen before in the process of turning a man into a werewolf. We've all seen these transformations in werewolf movies, and they all rely on the same visual elements. It's the stretching bones and it's hair growing in the face. Fortunately, today we have technology that allows us to do something a little bit different.
The approach to this film was to use pretty much modern-day update on the original Jack Pierce makeup, which was featured in the 1940s Wolfman, courtesy of Rick Baker, but feature it using contemporary photography, visual effects, into a sort of believable Victorian England environment. And I thought that that was quite a bold move.
What we're trying to do with these transformations is to keep it as real as possible, so that you believe that he's going through this. When the transformation is over and he becomes the Wolfman, that's frightening. We wanted the process of getting him there to be just as frightening. If you saw embryonic skin on an adult's hand, if the skin was so transparent you could see the bones through the hand when you held it up to the light, stuff like that I think is very frightening.
The one thing that all visual effects people dread hearing when we're talking about the transformation stuff, and that was this great line, "Yeah, okay, Steve, show me something I've never seen before." And you go, "What does that look like?"
Really kind of an exploratory process with the transformations. You start out with concept stills and reference from encyclopedias and move into previs and very quickly moved into some rough animation to start seeing things move.
Then we went on this sort of monumental, meandering route until we ultimately ended up with what you see on screen. But it was quite interesting to be thrown that challenge by someone who I had so much respect for.
We're doing things in the transformations in the Wolfman that you could only do with computer-generated animation. There's no other way to do it. We have a great place to start, the transformation, which is Benicio del Toro, and we have a great place to end up, which is Rick Baker's makeup on Benicio del Toro. But it's not a straight line transformation from one to the other.
This was our opportunity to work with Rick Baker, who's the preeminent creature design supervisor, who's won 6 Academy Awards, and the opportunity to meld really good CG effects with probably the best creature design in the world. This was an opportunity we couldn't miss.
Just loved the idea of sort of working with a guy who knew this kind of creature stuff inside out like almost no one around, and working with him and integrating sort of high-end CG work with his very, very top-end prosthetic creature work. And that made the whole thing very attractive to me.
When we came in and we saw these amazing sculpts that they'd done of these, potential shapes that this thing could take from its path from Benicio to werewolf, we immediately asked to get them cyber scanned. So we had 3D scans done of all that material.
I'm Sean Varney, and what we're doing here today is we're 3D laser scanning and cyber scanning all the props, the actors, and the various makeup sections that we've got for the werewolves and the actors.
Everything we could get our hands on, we cyber scanned either with the prop scanner or with a high-resolution body scanner, so that we could then take those designs in a 3D world and use those as a basis.
We could achieve stuff you couldn't do physically in front of the camera, such as hair growing.
And that's when we brought in MPC as a digital facility to help us achieve the whole transformation process and create the Wolfman. And they have their own proprietary software for hair growing and skin shaders and rendering. The software was in one condition, I think, when we started the project, and then they continued to write code and update this software as it went on, and it really started doing some amazing things.
At the Moving Picture Company, we've developed a piece of software called Fertility, which is a fur utility for doing hair. And on this show, when we first saw the breakdowns and the storyboards, we thought, oh, this is going to be a brand new challenge for this software. We've written it ourselves because for computer graphics, hair and fur is still one of the biggest challenges out there. We wanted to have a new level of control. Can we clump it up with blood and gore? We're going to really have to not just render a fur-covered object, we have to interact with it. And so it's one of these times when you start off thinking you know how you're going to do it, and you really have to just slog through it.
And action.
Mr. Talbot, it's good of you to join us.
What was interesting about the transformations, that each one had to be just slightly different, but they start low-key.
It was something that had always been planned out from the start. You know, they didn't want to give the game away. They didn't want you to see Benicio turn into a Wolfman, you know, full screen at the very, you know, start of the film. So the way that the T1 sequence was lit was, you know, always dark, always silhouettes.
It's a big sound effects moment, but you do see a few tantalizing glimpses of hands and feet grotesquely transforming.
Joe, the director, really wanted his first time to be really difficult on his body. You know, the body's never done this before, and it was excruciatingly painful.
At one point, you see Benicio stagger up to a puddle, look at a reflection of himself, and it's the first time that he actually sees himself. He sees his face transforming in the puddle. And the way that we shot that is we shot a few takes with actual puddles, then we slipped a mirror in, and we redid the takes with Benicio performing to the mirror. We had tracking markers and everything on his face. We ended up doing a full face replacement for him on that and a partial hand replacement for the bottom when his hand kind of crept into screen. But then we rippled the water out to try to kind of hide it. It was something that they always wanted to really, like I said, keep it saved up for the second transformation.
Not to be locked off, but any of the usable action we want to make sure with this side of his head.
The most difficult sequence that we worked on was the asylum transformation because it was brightly lit, it was in your face, it took a longer amount of time.
We had to show everything basically sort of full on. There was no subtlety in there. Everything was seen to a very high level of detail.
We started working immediately on those shots early on because we knew if we could pull that off, we could pull it off in a darker environment or in the woods or whatever it took place. So that was the most difficult sequence on the visual effects plate.
I thought, you know, one way or another, we've got to make this look like it could actually biologically happen. So Gary Brosnich and I at MPC started playing around with the idea of his bones inside him. They'd become dislocated and the cellular structure on his skin would be changing and morphing into you know, some kind of mutant before reconfiguring as the Wolfman.
So it's a full CG replacement of his face because his bones would be cracking underneath his skin. So the first thing that happens is that you zoom up on his cheek starts to crack and you know that something's really happening. And that's a digital head. Then his skin starts to go through a kind of rebirth process because, you know, it's only the second time he's ever done this. His skin softens and he grows a downy fur. The downy fur stays with him through the first 2 or 3 shots of the transformation. As he becomes more violent, we began to make his skin break more, become more heavily textured. The downy fur gets lost, and that starts to be overcome with dramatic skin changes. One of the big things for Joe was definitely the shape shifting that was happening to him. There was an idea that it was meant to go from Benicio to some other direction to be determined, and then eventually towards being the Wolfman. And it was that kind of middle point that we were always trying to figure out. There's one particular shot that happens in the center of it. That became the center of the attention of what the shape of his face was going to be at that point. All the shapes of his face have changed, where he's about 90% Wolfman, and then eventually cut from our last shot of the transformation to being the full Rick Baker Wolfman.
On certain occasions, we would augment the mask work. So if we needed the mouth of the Wolfman to open really wide, to take a bite out of something or someone, sometimes that was a CG mouth extension.
Here we go. And we roll camera. Rolling. And action.
We were met with a new challenge late in the game with the rooftop sequence where we were finally, you know, above London and able to get some scope into the film, basically a big fresh breath of air, big chase sequence.
The rooftop environment was basically a brand new environment. This whole sequence was realized shooting in a green screen environment with him running around on shapes that basically conformed to the architecture that he'd be running on top of. And that gave us the opportunity to give it like an unusual look.
It was our compositing team that really brought together the original photography and the 3D work so that there are shots where you just wouldn't even know we were there.
Compositing is combining the live action plates and the CG elements to bring to life the effects and the imagery that we're trying to create in order to tell a story.
He was above all the London smog, fog that you get around at that time, so the whole thing has a stylized feel for London. You can see for miles, which you probably couldn't then, so he's surrounded entirely by a CG environment.
The rooftop sequence was probably one of the biggest challenges I think we had on the film.
Let's do it slow.
The third most difficult to realize was the fiery fight at the end of the film.
And action.
It was a whole bag of tricks, really, to make the whole thing come together.
We have Anthony Hopkins, who's transforming into what we termed as the werewolf. Been doing it every month for however many years. It wasn't something that his body had to learn again. It wasn't something that was painful, and it wasn't something that was torturous. It was something that, it was just an event that his body would go through that he was used to. So it happens quite quickly. So really it was kind of 3 shots that happened over a very short sequence where his face transformed from being Anthony Hopkins into the werewolf. The way we did it is that, you know, who wouldn't want to let Anthony Hopkins just perform it, you know?
Camera mark. See camera. 20 frames.
So Joe shot it from a couple different angles. We put tracking markers on his face, really basic stuff, and we basically let the performance happen. We then took that material and then worked that in what we called digital prosthetics. So it's basically like partial face replacements of, you know, sections of his forehead, sections of his cheek, some teeth, but always trying to keep his eyes.
Here we go.
The big fight at the end sort of climaxes with the fiery fight. We initially thought that this is going to be something the stunt guys are going to love to do, you know, because he's in costume, you can set him on fire, and, you know, it'll look perfectly plausible and believable and spectacular. However, we had quite a heavy roll to remove wires and add CG leg extensions to the actual werewolves. And the guys at Rhythm and Hues, led by Derek Spears, had to basically create the whole fiery effect in CGI, which I think they did very successfully. And it was one of the many effects in the picture where you would assume would be done practically was sort of given to us. The actual head decapitation was quite an interesting little exercise in itself. As a reference point, I managed to get Sir Anthony Hopkins to roll around to make the head more realistic. The head actually rolling off was a 3D CG realization, and I think they did a great job.
I think that audiences today fully understand what you can do with computer animation, and they keep expecting to be blown away. They keep expecting to see things that they haven't seen before.
Go!
But computer animation is really just another tool to help tell the story. And it's really about the person sitting at the keyboard. That's the artist today.
I find, you know, in these types of movies, you're just proud to be a part of that original inspiration to do something like that. They're never easy, these things. They're always hard. Visual effects is still a hard thing to do, and I'm really proud of our team here that put together all this beautiful photorealistic work. Really, I think that was the big challenge for us, both for our modeling teams, our animation teams, and then ultimately the people working in lighting and compositing to make the images look photoreal.
I run into young people every day that they have never seen the original. This is something new for them, and I think that it's exciting to bring this to a young and new audience.
You don't go to this kind of movie without expecting to see 3 or 4 great action sequences. There's no car chases and there's no explosions, anything like that. It is action mixed with terror.
You can't really soft pedal the violence.
You've got to feel the power of what Two Beasts would be.
You know, it is this animal that goes out and has these uncontrollable urges and kills people.
We're trying to establish the fact that when the characters turn into werewolves, they have this much more supernatural power. They can jump bigger jumps, they can lift bigger weights, they can throw people through the air. So we have to assist them with that.
All the stunts basically are for real. Benicio's worked with us quite a lot. He's got his own twist to it.
The guys down there in Pinewood, stunt guys, were great to work with. They try to incorporate moves that I was comfortable with. You know, in these kind of movies, you need to be organized when you do all this stuff, and those guys down there, they did a great job.
And he's got a good stunt double. He's very good at his moves.
Hi, I'm Spencer Wilding. I'm going to be playing the Wolfman stunt bits.
Spencer, who ended up being the stunt double, he's quite tall. And he also has a face very much like Boris Karloff. I was watching him move and doing his stuff, and I go, let's use that guy. His body structure is nothing like Benicio, but it was cool, you know? And I said, you know, if it's going to be for longer shots and running around and we want him to be big, that guy's big. Put him in the leg extensions, he's going to be that much bigger.
You can run flat out and they really do sell the pose. You just bend into a little bit. It gives you a menacing appearance as well.
As the wolf, it's a little bit daunting. It's just like an elite force on his own. I've worked with him before. Like I say, he was on the stilts then and he moves really, really well.
Nowadays, people use CG, computer-generated images. We are trying to do this as much as possible with humans, acting as though they're feral animals.
2, 1, go! Okay, cut!
Okay.
I think the trick is making sure that you had the speed element. You know, the hardest thing about a werewolf movie today is trying to figure out how to move him correctly, not defy the logic of what a man does, but also extenuate what a man can do.
What we're just about to do is go on a carpet that's going to be towed about 20 miles an hour, which will give the effect of the Wolfman running at 35 miles an hour.
If you go to the airport and you're walking along one of those, hold onto the rail and off you go, you walk on it, you're overtaking people, it's similar to that, but obviously a lot quicker.
So you're going to get this effect of the wolf going twice the speed as a normal man, so it should be pretty scary.
So we are using human beings with wolf suits on, doing as much as you can physically with a human being, and the human beings are great athletes I've got in here.
Sometimes they had to be suspended from overhead cables if they were doing anything that was beyond just walking. To try to run or jump onto something, they had to be suspended.
This is our running rig. It's also great as a safety line if he falls over. Also, it doesn't damage the costume.
Then also we've got them running in what we call quadruped, where instead of running on 2 legs, they're now running like animals on 4 legs, which is very, very difficult to do. So the timing is quite intricate. One of our biggest sequences will be in London, in Greenwich, where we have the wolf running around rooftops and he does an 80-foot jump off a roof. The unique thing about this nowadays, which years ago wouldn't be unique, is the fact that we're going to do it with a human being jumping all the way, not a CG figure. We've been practicing the last 3 days, coordinating the camera move and the human move to synchronize together so we get the roller coaster feel as he jumps over the edge, and then we finish in front of him as he jumps down the last piece of the jump.
I was up on the rooftops about 80 feet in the air, and I had a wire on my back. I was running around the rooms, and they asked me to hang over the side and throw myself off, basically. And I just went with it and did it.
Trying to get a little bit of modernization into it, we're going to do some semi-werewolf parkour, where they jump from object to object on the way down. Again, to try and keep some semblance of reality into it, as much as you can, as I say, with a werewolf jumping around town.
I'm loving it. It's all new stuff. I'm learning some really hardcore stunt work.
Okay, here we go. Omnibus rehearsal.
Probably just about the biggest stunt in the film is the omnibus sequence when the Wolfman jumps out of the park and everyone terrified by the Wolfman and there's ensuing chaos. Basically, there's just going to be horses running around, there's carriages going over, people getting killed left, right and centre.
And we wanted something big, so we've got a 5.5-ton steam bus going over tonight with 14 passengers.
We had like a hydraulic accumulator pack inside for turning it over. So I had to do quite a few things, you know, all in one rig.
The dangerous thing about tonight is there's lots of people on the ground. You've got 200 extras walking around. There's about 40 stuntmen and women here. There's a lot of people in a small area with carriages going over and action going on, so we all have to have our wits about us.
Guys, we don't need to be here. Move back. Thanks very much.
And the omnibus is a big machine to get over. We had a fifth wheel pushing it over, so it was very much controlled, but it was a long way down, which is quite a big stunt.
Okay, so when we can, guys, let's back it to the start.
I mean, you can prepare for everything, but you're coming out at 16 foot high. You're coming out from there, okay, they're going to ride it down, but you're still going along at quite a lick. And there are a lot of people, so it's danger.
Okay, here we go. Action!
It worked really well. Spat all the boys out on the floor, you know, and horses rearing and galloping away. It was quite good.
The Great Hall was always one sequence that they did want to reinvent. The whole idea of this fight was we didn't want to get them punching and attacking like humans would. We wanted to get them more feral, have them galloping on quadruped, and have the attacks more like animals. So when they hit, they're just a ball of fur and dust, rolling around, fighting and snarling.
The stunt guy is a perfectionist. It looks pretty good. It looks very good, in fact. It looks really convincing. It's the Battle of the Titans.
The rigging in this is very intense, actually. It's very complicated. We have things called nitrogen ratchets, which are basically pistons that take off when you press a button. They just snatch people probably 20, 30 feet through the air. It all has to be worked from off the set, so we've got a lot of what we call witness cameras, videoing all the action on the set, which the people that are pulling the ropes and firing the pistons and everything, they're all doing it watching TV screens of what's happening inside the set. And you have to pull at the right moment when the guys are in stride so they don't look like Mary Poppins floating through the air. In general, we're trying to make all the movements gravity-based, so we're as real as you can get a werewolf. All that stuff has to be carefully calculated and rehearsed, so it's all very intricate work.
It's a big film. We've had a lot of stunt people on this all the way through, but it worked really well.